Welcome to the Tech Pathfinder Podcast, where we explore the impact of technology on the people in your workplace. Hello and welcome to the Tech Pathfinder Podcast, where we explore the impact of technology on the people in your workplace. I'm your host, JP, and I help businesses get the most out of their technology through the engagement and support of their people. Today, we'll be talking about leading hybrid teams in a more effective and inclusive way. Despite many organizations mandating the return to office in one way or another, there's still always going to be a really big portion of the work that's being done with hybrid and dispersed teams. Although many relationships and connectivity techniques are applicable both in person and online, it's time we start to consider how we can hone our online skills to ensure everyone across the organization is feeling connected and engaged. In this episode, I'm going to be joined by Birthe Nohrden, Director and Founder of Teamtalks, to discuss how to develop a regular rhythm with your hybrid team and to get more connection and enjoyment out of your meetings. Birthe is a thought leader in the realm of human connections at work, with expertise as an innovating learning designer. She's become a sought-after speaker and facilitator, specializing in leadership, productivity, workplace well-being, and professional development. Welcome to the show, Birthe.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. First off, tell us a little bit about yourself, about your background and your business, Teamtalks.
Sure. A little bit about myself. My name is Birthe Nohrden. It's spelled a little bit differently, but my background is German. So I grew up in a little village about an hour north of Hamburg in Germany. And that was a little bit of background about myself. Professionally, my background has mostly been in the people space. If it was recruitment or HR, leadership development, and now a lot of facilitation and leadership development trainings. And why I'm doing what I'm doing is my mission is to create workplaces where we come to work with a simple intention to lift each other up rather than putting each other down.
Yeah.
Because I feel that gives us an opportunity to leave the workplace with energy left in the tank to be our best version at home with our loved ones. That's my ultimate goal.
I think that's a really admirable goal to have. We historically used to think of work as a place that you went to make money and then you came home. But it's, as we're finding out, particularly over the last few years, you spend a really big portion of your life with the group of people. You want it to be an enjoyable space, an enjoyable time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There are some people, don't get me wrong, that are very good at having a clear cut between work and life. They actually can do it. At least consciously, they think they can do it. And that's a personality style, but that's only very few people.
So in the last year, there's been a big shift for a lot of businesses to return to work or return to the office. Return to work sounds like we weren't working in the past. I think we definitely were working. Don't come after me. But, traditional, in work office environments, obviously for certain roles, some roles have been, present the entire time. We're seeing a lot of businesses adopting some sort of hybrid policy, either 3 and 2, 4 and 1, having a day where everyone's in, say everyone's in on a Wednesday. There's a lot of different versions and varieties of it.
Yes.
Why do you think executive teams are so insistent in dragging people back into the office?
Yeah, it really is. There's always a multiple array of reasons. And I believe, depending what lens you want to put on it, right? It can be care. Because if I think of duty of care, and if I speak to a lot of HR directors and they say in our surveys, in our engagement surveys, we hear people love working from home and they want to keep working from home, but what they're missing is connection. Now, if you are familiar with well-being, psychological safety, and a bit of social psychology, if you feel you don't belong to your team anymore, if you feel disconnected, it actually is a huge stressor for your psyche, and you will be less productive and less innovative and less creative in your work. So in a way, if you put on the positive lens, I think companies want people back in the office to make sure that they stay connected
Mm.
in terms of the well-being factor. Now, if you put on the lens of an employee thinking they just want me back because they don't trust me, that could be another lens. The truth is we don't know the truth. It's always different for every company, even for every leader. But the trust factor is a big one, that managers are just not used to trusting, or they think people only do work when they are on site. Yeah. Or they think, that some people haven't been online for 2 hours, they're slacking off.
Yeah.
So that is certainly a fear factor. It's distrust and there is fear. And we hear that from executive leadership in, Commonwealth Bank, for example.
Yeah.
That think, people only work when they're in the office, which is all the research shows that actually productivity went up after we all went working from home.
It was interesting. The first few examples of articles that we saw on LinkedIn or in papers around coming back into work. If you dug just a little bit deeper, they're always coming from owners of big property moguls and property management companies, because they wanted to maintain the utility of office space. They were worried that was the driver. So there's a lot of fear mongering that goes around, and I think for me the biggest issue with the policies that come out these days is it's often a one size fits all approach, when in reality that's not appropriate. We often try to find this balance between what execs want, what the employees want, and we feel that has to be this level of fairness, and fairness used as a word of everyone gets the same. If I have to be in 3 days a week, 4 days a week, then my entire team has to be in. And the reality is people's circumstances are different. They're home experiences. We heard through COVID, I had colleagues and friends who struggled working from home because they lived by themselves, or so they didn't have the same connections outside of work that others might have, but they also didn't have the space. They were living in an apartment. They were working off dressers, off kitchen tables, on
talking about duty of care, and what does it do to your back and everything else.
100%. So there's it's a difficult thing to balance.
It's not an easy thing, and no company has figured it out 100%. And I think the biggest thing is going with a sentence that we're all learning. Like there's no such thing as the perfect way. And I think those companies that do it best, they give permission to the team leaders or the managers to speak to their individual teams and have a solution figured out with the team, where they ask the employees, what can we start with? And then let's start a trial for 3 or 4 months. See how it goes. It's not set in stone. We can always amend it. But when it comes to decision making, I'm also a productivity trainer. And in terms of a decision, is the best decision you can make is the right decision. The second best one is the wrong decision, because at least then that was the wrong decision. But the worst thing you can do is making no decision, because then you just get stuck and you never move on. And that's I think the courage we need to have with hybrid workplaces, of just trial and error.
So can you explain to us a little bit about the unique dynamics of hybrid teams and how they, I guess, differ from in-office or full remote teams? Where does hybrid sort of fit in that realm?
I think another question on top of that is to see, where do people come from? I speak to IT project teams that have worked with remote teams for the last 10, 20 years. And those workers are used to remote work. They have found their pattern and their routine for remote work. And the same thing with working on site. Most people would then have experience of working on site. They figured out their way. The most difficult part with hybrid teams is that many of us have not been used to it. So we actually have to change the routine and a thinking of how do we now feel valued at work? How do I now connect with my colleagues? How do I instigate the water cooler chat to get to know new people? If I'm a new starter, what do I do to reach out? And I think this is the most difficult part when you think of dynamics. There's just so much uncertainty. We don't have the set routines. And whenever we have uncertainty, psychologically, our brain goes always to the worst case scenario. So the biggest challenge is when there is no answer, often our brain, an employee brain or manager brain, goes into worst case scenario. Someone is not on their desk, they're slacking off. Someone doesn't call me, they don't like me. I don't hear back from my colleagues or my manager, I don't belong to the team anymore. And these are micro moments of fear, disconnection, and stress, which adds to the complicated dynamic of hybrid team. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge of figuring out a routine and being open. Speak about what we feel. Speak about our fears too. If we can name it, then we can tame it.
Yeah, I think a lot of the policies are quite often top down, and I guess that's where a lot of the concern comes, because the employees don't feel engaged with the conversation about how should we work. It's a top down approach, and I think the ones that suffer the most from that are the leaders and the managers who are actually sitting in those meetings. Their role is to engage the people and engage and manage the hybrid teams. What are some of the challenges that you can see in your experiences that managers and leaders have, and working with hybrid teams, and how does this impact their connectivity and empathy within their team?
I'm all about connection and empathy. So let's focus firstly, not just on the work, but on how we connect. So like you and I at the moment, we are online, right? And we got used to it over the last 3 years, but to interpret body language is still almost impossible if you're not with the person in the same room. Science and neuroscience tells us that we can't get to a certain stage of connection even when we're not physically in the same room. So technology basically stops us from physically connecting, which stops us from building trust. So that's one thing. The other thing is, how do we communicate, and how often do we communicate? And I think when often one manager is in the same office with their team, there's kind of always a communication. There's communication between manager and team, and also peer-to-peer. And these are two very important conversations. Now, when we're hybrid and we're not always in the same place, and even if we are all in on Wednesday, and I've seen it in offices, people still just on their desk and they don't do anything different than they do at home. So just because we are physically in the same space doesn't mean that we connect more if there is no plan to actually connect more. So the two conversation managers have to realize is not just them towards their team, like one-on-one, but also peer-to-peer. And this is really, really, really overlooked in so many organizations. How do I make sure that my peers interact in a planned way now that we work hybrid, to make sure that everyone is engaged? Because otherwise, who do you reach out to? Like, it's the person left and right that you probably know from the office. The newbies, they wouldn't get the call. So I think this is a level of managed conversations, which is part of what I do with Teamtalks, to make sure that these conversations do take place on a regular basis.
When we're in the throes of lockdowns, I was actually working in an M&A role, integrating a new business that my company had acquired out of the UK. So, and I was working really closely with this team in the UK and spending a lot of time, obviously entirely through digital. And sort of thinking back then, I actually had a better connection with the team in the UK than the team that I was working with in Australia, because we had a really, and I don't know whether it was deliberate, but we had a really good routine of, on a Monday morning, we had a half an hour catch up, and it was mostly just social. What's been going on? How is everybody? Little stories about the weekend, the kind of water cooler office talks that you'd have if you were, sitting next to someone.
Yeah.
We made deliberate time for those conversations to be had, and I think that makes a really big difference to how how you go about your day, because I knew that so and so was, had a sick dog over the weekend, so it
Mm.
impacted my messaging to that person because I knew that they were a little snowed under. I knew so and so had a couple of days off last week because they were unwell, and that means that they've got a little extra workload to catch up on, and that those little things, you kind of take it for granted when you're in an office setting and you know that these things are going on, but
Yeah.
being really deliberate and making the time for those things. The all-in days, you're right. I think the biggest issue people are having with all-in days is finding space for meetings, because everyone's now used to being able to be as loud on the call as they used to be. So the layouts of offices being, open plan is the future, not the future anymore. We go back to cubicles, soundproof booths, so that we can all have our space, but maybe meet up in the lunchroom. I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, well, we have to keep it interesting, right? We need some developers to keep redesigning.
Yeah, some redesigning with the spaces that we've got. You mentioned regular rhythms with hybrid teams. Could you elaborate a little bit more on what this means and how it contributes to enhancing that connection and engagement?
Yeah, it's almost, I call it positive social engineering. And the analogy I use is what I do with Teamtalks. The analogy is having a book club where we make sure. Let's go to the framework on its own. Regular, intentional meetings need to be set in the diary, otherwise they won't happen. And very often the first problem is that we don't prioritize those relationships. Like you said, you spend 30 minutes on just a chat, whereas I hear people say, yeah, we have the Monday catch up, but that's probably a 10 minute at the max. And then for the next hour, we spend about what are we going to do this week?
Yeah.
So now we have connection and task mixed up.
Yeah.
The key in productivity training and also in effective meetings, so I am a productivity trainer, is to do one meeting that is just for connection.
Yeah.
And often we don't value that as hugely important, rather than, and we just have meetings on tasks and what needs to get done. But when we look at what makes teams most successful is not the planning. And all research, when we look at the Google Aristotle study, when we look at Amy Edmondson and psychological safety, when we look at Lencioni's 5 dysfunction of a team, the base is always connection. We need to have trust and connection first. And if we have that, we will be more productive. So my invitation is to make time in the diary to actually just connect. And I do that. And with my model, I have three ways for this. One thing is pretty much a meeting with yourself to connect with yourself and learn something that inspires you, mostly about the human connection. The second one is just you and I, just two people meet up. And we talk about what we learned about the human connection. Let's say we do a personality test and we talk about our personality styles. That's interesting. And that's a meaningful conversation. And then lastly, we meet with the whole team at the end of the month and repeat that again and talk about personality styles of the team. Now we can name it and then we can tame it and we can say, hey, you and I are totally different. How can we avoid conflict in the next time?
Yeah.
And these are micro moments of connection, micro moments of belonging. And the more we do that every month as a habit, so I say, put that in as a habit, just like an exercise habit, do that every month. And it just takes little moments, but they add up to be that thicker skin for your team to protect yourself from turnover, from blowouts, from I don't feel trusted, and give people courage to speak up and ask questions. So it's not a we all go rope climbing one day and now we're all going to trust each other, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's you kind of. I think the analogy and the process that you go through, it to me, I was just thinking that then to me it feels a lot like when you're onboarding a new employee into the organization and you give them an onboarding buddy, a partner, a guide, someone to, show them the ropes, show them what happens in the organization. And it's really deliberate. You put in time to calendar, and it's more
Yeah.
checking in. Hey, what are you up to? How you
Mm.
going? Any questions? And it's taking that idea, that method of just having a personal connection outside of the actual work. Often you tie someone in from a different department so they don't get trapped into those conversations. You're actually really deliberately just connecting on
Yes.
a personal level, and having that process where and as from a productivity nerd perspective, I love the idea of being really deliberate. I've in my calendar, I'd put some time at the end of the week to just sit down and kind of do a reset, see where, what worked, what didn't, check where, what do I need to do for Monday morning. And it's a little bit about having that, really deliberate self-reflection on, what have I learned, what have I missed. The number of times I've been in meetings and someone's thrown out an acronym or a term or a reference that I just didn't get, but I just nodded and smiled. Yeah, absolutely. I get that. Okay, hang on, I didn't understand that. Maybe I should Google it. Maybe I should look it up. What is that? Oh, now I understand that. So next time we talk about it. And so that personal growth and development is really important. But then that building that self-awareness so that when you're having the conversation with someone else in that second step, you're actually engaging, you're checking your work almost. You're sort of saying, look, these are the things I learned. Oh, I didn't know that either. Oh, good. We're both human. Excellent.
Exactly. That's what you just said. Is the key sentence. We are both human.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is the key sentence of realizing, as much as I don't like the way you write, as long as I don't like the way you show up, I realize through this process, we're actually just striving for the same things.
Yeah.
We are all human, no matter what your background is, what your title is, and everything else. And what I find important in the end, it's like a leadership training for the whole team, where you maybe take 30% that you normally have in executive leadership training, all connected to the human connection, but you implement it with the whole team over a longer period of time. So it honestly is like an exercise routine. And the funny thing is, when you think of when I talk to teams and they start working with me, and it's about this one-on-one conversation, like I call them the peer talks. Often I have the initial, I don't know this person very well. What should we talk about for 45 minutes?
Yeah.
And I do give them a conversation guide, but nevertheless, there's an initial fear, which is human, right? There's this initial, this is uncomfortable, this is unfamiliar. Then they go through it, and I tell you, 90% of participants say this is the best part of the whole thing. I actually had 45 minutes. I got to know this person better. And these things now will, of course, transfer to the work. Whenever I have a question, I know who to call now. I trust this person more. And, I ask questions when I don't know a word rather than just pretending I do. So there's a lot of power in those micro moments that I see working.
And you see that, the evidence of that happening if you look in your own workplace right this minute and think of the people who have been around the organization the longest, worked in different teams, maybe know lots of people. They're the people you go and ask the questions of, not because they've been around a lot and they necessarily know everything, but they know a lot more people in the organization. So they know, oh, if I've got a question about this, I go to, I can ask this person, and I, know that they'll, give me a valid response, and I can trust their response. But I know their background, I know they're engaged, I know how to have that conversation with them. So it's, and that's notwithstanding the conversations that we're having with hybrid at the moment. So if you take that theory and that model and deploy it into those hybrid conversations, I think it works really well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the cross-pollination, like, two bees and two flowers, and we just talk and we connect, and that will help us with so many other things. 100%. And you can, as an example, I've done it with a team of 16, and they all worked in the same room in 4 different pods, And the feedback was, it was the first time we all worked on one project together. It's breaking down barriers.
Yeah.
Because the whole idea is actually working on the team. Prioritizing working on the team. That's how simple as it is.
Yeah, and every team, every organization goes through silos at some point. So it's a good way to break those down in a really human way. If we think about leaders who are balancing those offline and online interactions, how do you make sure that every employee is feeling included? Say, I've got a team who there's three of us based in one office and we see each other physically maybe twice a week, three times a week. But I've also got a couple of team members in a different state or, over in overseas maybe, or, in a different location, maybe just remote in a regional setting.
Yeah.
How do I, as a leader, make sure I balance so that everyone feels included regardless of where they're sitting?
Yeah, this is, again, going back to being deliberate and making sure that connections take place. And it's not just always about the manager having to make all the connections, it's making sure that the people within each other, within like the peers, connect as well. So it's natural to develop a bias that you know the people better that you see on a regular basis. It's natural because they feel more comfortable and more familiar. And when someone just works far away, it's natural to be, if we don't speak on a regular basis, to be just have that initial, again, oh, this is unfamiliar. First thing is to be self-aware of it. For a start, and be honest with yourself that this is what's happening.
Yeah.
But then again, having deliberate times where everyone is together. And I know some companies say if we do team meetings, we make sure either everyone is online or everyone is in the office. We don't like the hybrid kind of way because then the people that dial in feel less connected than the people in the room. Yeah, but, going back, I think it's self-awareness and having a deliberate meeting where we ask people, would it feel better for you if we all online? Or are you okay if some of us are in the office and some of us are not? And based on that, I would then set up the meetings.
Yeah, I've had, even pre-COVID, we used to have meetings with a team based in Melbourne, and the majority of the team, certainly the leadership, sitting in Sydney. And you'd sit in a meeting and you could see when people were the people remote weren't engaged. And it wasn't because they weren't trying to be engaged, but they, when questions were asked, you went to them last. You went to them, there wasn't a deliberate attempt to include them. And it wasn't deliberate malice either. It was just, you're in the throes of a meeting, getting through everything. You've only got an hour in the calendar, a million things going on. You don't think about it. But I think being really deliberate about, those connections, knowing, okay, I know I've got so-and-so, I've got someone who's remote, or I know I've got these people who are remote. Let's make sure that whenever a question's posed, we sort of stop and allow for people and have that awkward silence of 5 seconds for people to unmute themselves. Just accept that that's how the meeting has to happen, how the conversation has to happen. Because otherwise you can very quickly skip. It's like, any questions? No. Okay, great. Let's move on. I'm like, what? I barely leant forward to, hit unmute before you moved on.
So true. And that's probably, again, one thing that comes with hybrid. We have to be more outspoken about our expectations.
Yeah.
What is our meeting rule? What is the meeting rule? So for years, we've just had meetings, and let's be honest, 70% of the people attending the meetings probably thought, do I really have to be here?
Yeah.
Right. I think hybrid gives us an opportunity to talk about what we needed to talk about before COVID.
Yeah.
Let's be open, set expectations. What are our meeting rules? And once the rule is set and expectations are set, people have permission to speak up.
Yeah. So how should organizations measure the level of connection and engagement in a hybrid team? How do you assess if you make changes, are those changes working, or what's your baseline, and how do you use those findings?
Yeah, again, that's overall, I think there's great engagement surveys that you can use.
Yeah.
Culture M, for example, is a technology that has become very popular to just do quick check-ins more often rather than just one check-in a year to see how people are feeling. And it is an individual experience. So we have to realize that while there is an overall statistics, it could just be different depending on personality styles, depending on who, when did we start and how long has this person been in the team for, and et cetera, et cetera. But client engagement surveys brings us data. We know we need data to make big decisions. And I would do them at least every 3 months, probably even every month, for a quick check-in, 5 questions to ask about level of trust. How much do I respect maybe leadership? There's 4 or 5 key questions I would ask just to see what the level is at. And then we've got data on turnover, how people are leaving, how long do they stay with us. We can probably measure productivity depending on the role that there is to see, has there been a shift? Is there anything we need to do? Or why is one team much better than the other one? Again, that could raise a question.
Yeah, that visibility is really important to see. And I think managers often, again, it's about communicating and how you deploy that sort of, if you're not making, collecting this data at the moment, if you're not doing surveys, communicating with the leadership and the management, this is what we're doing, but this is why we're doing it. We're not spying on you. We don't want to find out who's doing the wrong thing. It's about growth and development of the people in your teams and just as importantly, you as an individual. What do you think is a final takeaway, a key piece of advice for anyone who's managing a hybrid team and they want to foster that strong sense of, connectivity and empathy?
Yeah. One biggest thing is open communication with the team and being vulnerable and tell the team, I don't have the answer. Let's work on it together. And immediately you will have more buy-in from the team for whatever the solution will be.
Yeah.
And then as my framework is the think, pair, share framework, where, again, you can start with a book club of having one shared experience, making sure everyone in the team is going through the same experience. Now, I'm using not rope climbing. I'm actually suggesting to use learning of inspirational things, mostly about human connection. And there's a lot even available online for free.
Yeah.
And lift up the team collectively in knowledge of well-being, mental health, digital distraction, any of those topics are interesting for everyone, and create a shared experience. It creates a meta space in thought where we feel connected, even though we're not necessarily in the office connected. And then have that framework of think, let everyone read for themselves. Pair, where we pair up in twos at least once a month. And you and I are going to meet in week 3 and have a chat about what we learned. And then share, have that deliberate meeting once a month about the team, just about the team. Where are we as a team? And about the book that we've been reading or whatever pages we looked at. That would be my recommendation. Having a deliberate routine, a habit, a rhythm of connection, a ritual of connection. So everyone knows what to expect. And it's also signaling that now the manager sets this as a priority.
Yeah. And the benefits of that, just they're so far reaching within a team. It builds that psychological safety so people feel okay to speak up and you're then engaging, introverts and extroverts equally because everyone feels like they do have a voice. That level of engagement and buy-in for the team and knowing that, I know for a fact that I've had leaders in the past who I feel would, to use the phrase, get in the trenches with me. Like if I needed help doing the work, that they'd offer the help, and I'm forever grateful for that individual because I know that they're they're willing to do any of the yards that, they're willing to go wherever they're going to send me.
Yeah.
So that also builds that culture of innovation. That people are willing and comfortable because of that safety to try new things and to evolve the organization. And the productivity gains there are massive.
Massive. It covers all the skills of the future of work. If you look at skill development, the top 5 skills are based on human connection. Collaborate well with others, your own resilience and well-being, being innovative and creative, which we can't do if we don't feel safe.
Yeah.
So, and having a learning culture, this is another big keyword. And this is what we do on a regular basis. Yeah. A group learning experience is where we know, okay, that's why we're doing it, because we're all doing it.
Yeah.
Rather than just me getting lost in LinkedIn library and trying to find a course that I might never end.
Yeah. Yeah. Start but not finish.
Yeah.
Look, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. I've really enjoyed jumping into this. It's a really interesting topic to me personally. So really appreciate your time and have a great day.
Thank you so much. And thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Not a worries. Cheers.
Bye.
Have you ever wanted to learn an easy yet highly effective method to navigate the loss of close-knit connections in hybrid and remote team settings? Birthe and a company Teamtalks can help you with just that. Instead of simply leaving you alone with a playbook of good advice, Teamtalks actually walks the journey with you and your team until everyone has bought in and is upskilled in this new ritual of connection, which only takes each employee 30 minutes a week. A surprisingly simple idea of social engineering, curating deep and lasting connections, and a sense of belonging for leaders and peers alike. The result is well-teaming, increasing the well-being of people and business. To find out more, go to teamtalks.com.au. Thank you to Teamtalks for supporting this episode.